Hello and welcome to another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. For today's video, we will be talking about how do I use development tools in CloudBolt. Let's just kind of set some background here. So talking through the business value here, and I like to set these up with a challenge and then how CloudBolt answers that challenge. So automating cloud processes is extremely important to organizations today. If you're not fully automated and there are manual links anywhere inside of your automation tool chain, what ends up happening is that introduces potential manual configuration errors, plus it slows down your delivery process. So CloudBolt's answer to that is no company in the world can automate everything just because APIs are constantly changing, maturing, new products hit the market every single day. So CloudBolt does a really good job with what we term extensibility. We have an open extensibility framework which enables our customers, when we don't support a brand new endpoint or some brand new feature of some cloud provider that got released yesterday, you as the customer have the power to extend the system to meet your use cases in the way that you see fit. So we are extremely flexible under the covers. But I think a lot of customers are kind of challenged when first working with the product. You know, what are the tools available to me to understand how to automate CloudBolt? How do we work with the system under the covers? And this is just one of a couple of development-oriented videos that we're doing in this series. This one specifically is going to walk through a couple of development tools that are packaged with CloudBolt. So we're going to cover that, and here's the agenda for this video. We're going to start off with development tips and tricks, and then we're going to get into the database model browser. This is just a way that we can go through the different models and classes that are available inside of the CloudBolt system, things that we may need to work with, like groups and servers and resource handlers and environments. Basically, how to figure out what's available for each of those objects. How do we change those objects, maybe create new objects? We'll walk through some examples there. We'll also do, I think the majority of this session is going to center around Shell Plus. Shell Plus is our interactive database command line interface where you can go in on the CloudBolt appliance and start to interact with the database models in real time. This is extremely powerful and I would say extremely essential for understanding development inside of the CloudBolt ecosystem. This is going to be the longest portion of this video, but we're going through a real-world example where we build out a use case in CloudBolt and walk through just some of the steps that I would typically go through in Shell Plus to build out a new automation use case. So we're going to demonstrate that. And then finally, we'll go into a kind of a newer release that we have at CloudBolt in our documentation, which is just our developer's guide, which helps developers as they get started with developing in CloudBolt, walks you through some of the common constructs and explains things in a little more detail than just some of the standard like administrative documentation does. So these are the three main things that we're going to cover as part of the video today. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's take a look at the CloudBolt database browser. This is really the beginning to understanding development inside of CloudBolt. I think that this database model browser is pretty important to understanding development processes and things like that. To get to the database browser, it's a pretty easy URL. So it's alladmin/doc/models. To do this, you may have to have a special role set inside of the CloudBolt system. Why don't I just show that real quick? But we're going to just jump into Shell Plus real quick. Some of these modules are like intertwining with one another. We're going to get into Shell Plus here at some point here soon, but I'll just show you the commands without really explaining a ton of what's going on here. The first thing we need to do is get the user object for our user profile. So I'm going to just do, I already have it saved. That's my user account, and then the user account, or the user profile, there's a couple of is permissions here. One's is cbadmin, one is superadmin. I thought there was another one. Let's do, I just want to check. So it's not the user profile we want to get. We want to get the user object itself. The user profile can get CloudBolt permissions, but when we start getting a little deeper, it's going to be something a little different. So user object and user profile are usually the same ID. I'm not 100% sure if that's all the time, but there's my user object. And then it is this is staff flag here. So for my account, you can see user is staff equals true. For your account, if you are not staff and you're getting errors trying to access the database browser, you can do user is staff equals true, and then user.save, and that will do the trick to update your user account. I don't think you have to log back out and log back in, but it can't hurt to do that. Then you can come back. You should be able to access the model browser inside of CloudBolt. So again, all admin doc models. CloudBolt as a system is broken up into different models, and each model represents a different object type inside of CloudBolt. You'll see on the left-hand side here we have a bunch of different model groups. Usually the model groups represent the parent Python module that we're importing those models from. So just as an example, we do a lot of work with infrastructure. The infrastructure group includes things like servers and environments. Custom fields or something else. These are actually parameters inside of the UI. A lot of different types of objects in here. We could also do, I'm a big fan of, on any web page, just doing a control F in my browser. We could also search for different objects if we have a suspicion of what we're looking for. Or maybe we want to look for something like a specific resource handler type. Instead of like vCenter, it would be vSphere. This should take us to, there's our VMware resource handler. So we can get to those different types. They are grouped inside of the browser as with similar types. Let's just go back to the server infrastructure server type here, though. Each of these objects are navigable. Is that a word? Navigatable? Anyway, we can click on the object and go to more information about it. And you'll see inside of this server object, it gives us all of the available parameters that are available here. You can see a list of these. Again, some descriptions for some of this. So if we need to search and find something specifically we're looking for, like maybe I'm looking to find out how do I get the name of a server. You'll notice this host name shows here as part of the server model at the top, but we can also scroll down and see there is no name parameter on a server in CloudBolt. So if we're trying to either get a server by name or find the name of a server, we would reference it by server.hostname. There are some other links in here that go to different objects that might be associated with this. A lot of times in CloudBolt, we have server objects that then are represented by different models. So you can really find any information about the server that you need to know. If you scroll down towards the bottom of each of these models, you'll also see methods that we can pass arguments into. So you'll see on the right-hand side, if there are any arguments that you pass in, like create, delete snapshots job, you can pass in snapshots to tell it which snapshots to delete if you're trying to automate things from this server object. Things along like copy file to server, some of the helper methods that we have if you needed to automate some of those things. Really, there's a lot of different methods. Depending on the class that you're working with, it could be more or less. Server's one of the ones where there's a lot that we do just because there's a lot that we do around infrastructure server objects. So I think that's really the basics for the database browser. This is, again, an extremely powerful way to navigate through the models in the CloudBolt ecosystem, link between different related objects, all of those kinds of things, and just begin to explore what you can do with extensibility in CloudBolt. We're going to take a look at setting up Shell Plus connectivity in CloudBolt, or how to leverage Shell Plus as a developer tool. So Shell Plus is an interactive database tool that we can use as part of our development processes inside of CloudBolt. I'm going to start just by opening a terminal session over to my CloudBolt server. I'm using VS Code here. You can also do this in PyCharm. You can even do it in just PuTTY. You can use PuTTY to SSH to your machine, and then once you're logged into CloudBolt, you can then launch Shell Plus. One of the things that I will mention about Shell Plus is that you do need to have root permissions to be able to launch Shell Plus. Whether if you're using a different user other than root to log in, you need to be able to do a sudo su dash to switch over to the root account. And then once you've done that, then you would be able to launch Shell Plus. It's a highly privileged application since we're talking to the database directly. So I also would protect this appropriately to be sure. And this is kind of where, if you go down the route of having multiple developers instances where every developer has their own instance, then, allowing a developer access directly to their own database where they're not going to interfere with other people's things that they're doing, I think is a good development model with CloudBolt. But anyway, we're logged into my CloudBolt server, and I'm going to point out, so Shell Plus, it can be launched by doing opt CloudBolt opt CloudBolt manage, thinking about a completely different special directory. So the manage.py, this is a Django-based command, but we have some kind of scripts that we can pass into this. And one of the scripts that we can pass into this is shell plus, shell_plus. So by running this command, what this is going to do is going to launch us into an interactive database session where we can run commands against our CloudBolt database. One of the easiest ways that I usually, one of the ways that I would get started with Shell Plus is through going into taking a look at maybe servers that I'm leveraging, and where I have servers here, maybe I wanted to see something against this particular server. When I hover over a server object in the CloudBolt catalog, I see at the bottom left-hand corner, you notice that the very last element to my URL is 22111. That is the ID for the server that I'm going to grab inside of Shell Plus. So I'm going to jump back over to my command line session. A lot of times I'll grab an object that I already know about, and I'll start to navigate that object with the database browser. So this is, as you start to work with CloudBolt and understand the database model and the different object types that are available inside of the database, you'll start to learn these. You can also use the database model browser to get to these types. But we can do server.objects, and then we can do a get. And I'm going to do an ID of 22111. I'll also show some other handy kind of commands here for the objects thing here. So now I have, basically what this does is this will capture my server. Actually, I'm going to set this to a variable. I'm going to do server equals. And what I'm doing here is I'm interacting with Python. So I have a Python environment that gets stood up that I can interact with. I can now save this server object, and I can then verify that, first of all, I have the correct server object. But I can do server dot, and I can hit my tab key, and you'll start to see all of these different properties that are associated with the server object and methods that are associated with this. So if we wanted to find out maybe available actions on this particular server, we can run that. I need to give it my profile because that's a role-based access control thing. I'm not going to actually. Let's do that. Let's show how to get a different user type. So I need to pass in a profile. Notice again, I can hover over my profile. Bottom left-hand corner, you can see that my profile is ID 13 in this particular system. So I'm going to go back over, and instead of server, I'm going to do user equals. Now I can do user, and we can tab these objects here. So you'll notice there's a couple of different things that are available here. The user object in CloudBolt really houses things like information about me, who I am, my email address, my first name, last name, those kinds of things. User profile, though, is usually leveraged in the system to provide control and things like that. So I'm going to do user profile. And I believe, if I recall correctly, the user and user profile IDs typically match. They're related somehow. I'm not entirely sure how we do that. A bit of database magic. But we can do user profile.objects.get, and then we're going to do ID equals 13. And we should now have my Michael Bombard object. So I now have my user account. I can go back up to available actions. Now I can pass my user object into my server that available actions method. So what I get here is a list of actions that my user is able to take against this server. Now what's really cool is this list here is what we're leveraging. That method that we just called is what we actually call inside of our UI when I go in and look at this particular server. That's exactly how we're generating this list over here on the left-hand side of day 2 actions. It knows my user profile based off of who I am. It's returning this list of available actions for the server, and then it's rendering this list into an HTML formatted web page that you can now interact with as the end user. So we have some of those helper methods on each of these objects. So that's just a real quick example of getting a server object, getting a user object, and then going through and doing something with them to get some information about them. I'm also going to do maybe a couple more things in Shell Plus I think are helpful. So when we're working with objects, sometimes you want to get an individual object and you know the server you're acting against. You want to kind of browse through the server and find things you can do against it. But at other times, you may want to get a list of servers. So the other thing that we can do here is I'm going to go back up to where I set my server, and I'm going to do servers. I'm going to get a list of servers now. One of the things I can do is server.objects.all. And what's interesting here is I can see, here's an abbreviated list of my servers. I can also pass this into a length command, and we'll see that I have, it's going to be a lot of servers here. It's looping through that whole thing. So 23,000 servers that have been listed in here. I can tell you, based on experience, I do not have 23,000 servers active in my environment. And the key there is being active. So the number of servers that I have visible in this environment, let's just take a look and see what the number should be. We're going to clear all of those filters. We can scroll down and see there's 338 active items. Now, notice there's also in my UI, I have the show historical trigger. So I can turn on that show historical filter, and I can apply this, and now I should see 23,512 items, which is really interesting because we saw 23,512 items. So the difference there is that I did not filter my servers that I requested as part of that servers call in the command line to prevent or to not pull in historical items. So there's a couple of ways. There's a lot of things we can do with what are called filters in CloudBolt. So CloudBolt under the covers, it is leveraging the Django web framework. Django, I'm going to go back to servers. And instead of a server.objects.all, I'm going to do, and again, this is all tabbable. This is just things that I know about the Django system. But I could tab through this and see the options that are available against all of these objects. So I could do all. I'm actually going to opt for this filter command. And filter allows us to go out and filter my results and only return the results that I want to see. Now I'm also going to do something else where I do server dot. I'm going to see if this works. I don't think this is going to get me what I need, but I'm going to do __ dict, and this is just a Python command. If your classes are defined appropriately, it may give you the information you're looking for, and I'm looking for active because I know that this particular server is active. So notice that active is part of my status. So this is what I need to filter on is my status, and I'm going to find statuses that are equal to active. And we should see that same, I think it was 332 results that were shown on the other page. But if we're starting to filter, let's do, and then we're going to do status equals active. And let's check the length of our servers. 338, so exactly what we're expecting. Now I can also take this a little bit further. Maybe I want active powered on servers. So we have a status here, and now I'm looking, again, the __ dict prints out properties about the server that we know. I could also do server, and I do a lot of this when I don't see it in the dictionary entry here. I can also tab through and see if I find something with maybe power status, and I can hit the tab key, and I can see this power status. And I can hit power status. I can see that server.power status. The status of that server is power on right now. So maybe we only want active powered on servers. So in my filter, instead of just doing .active, I can do a comma, and I can do a power underscore status equals power on. And just check how many servers I have again. I have 282 servers. I'm fairly confident that that's the number of actual powered on servers inside of my environment. And there's a couple of things that I could do with this group of servers that I have. I could go through and take action against them if I wanted to. Again, a lot of times what I'm trying to do with this is I'm trying to just see what I'm trying to write as automation. So I'll usually have like a Python script up above where I'm testing and validating each of my commands as I'm building automation. Just that way, I think it helps with testing just to see that this is behaving the way that I need it to behave at the time of execution. Why don't we do... I'm just going to show some of that. So I'm just going to use some of the things that I know that I've used before. I'm going to just create a new, let's do a new Python file. I'm just going to call it add cfv.py. And I'll explain what I'm doing here as we go through. So one of the things that CloudBolt does is it allows you to build in parameters. So in the user interface in CloudBolt, you can build different types of parameters. Let's just go over and show what that looks like from a parameter perspective. But from parameters admin, I can create a new parameter here. I can give it a label, which is a user-friendly value. I can give it a name, which is more of a database kind of value, usually all lowercase and underscores between words. I can define different types for this. I can specify different ways that I want this to interact inside of my environment. Now, I may want to create a new parameter programmatically, and then I may also want to add a value for that parameter to my server. So what I'm going to do now is go through the process to, first of all, create a new parameter. And then second, I'm going to add an actual value for that parameter to this server. I actually do a lot of this as part of automations that I'm building. So I think this is a fairly relevant use case using Shell Plus, just to show how this gets leveraged. So again, I have my server. I already have a server object that I want to use. But the next thing that I want to do in CloudBolt, and in CloudBolt, the idea of a parameter is a, let's actually do a test. Let's test something here. Let's go over and take a look at our database browser. I'm not entirely sure what this looks like, but if I look for parameter, no, I didn't want to bookmark it. I wanted to search it. So there's different types of parameters, job parameters, hook parameters, trigger parameters. I don't see just a base parameter though. Okay, so I don't see a base parameter, and at least it's not labeled here. But maybe one thing we can do, let's try one more thing. Let's go to our server object. I'm going to look for a server. So I just want a base server. I don't need all of my servers. Actually, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to grab a VMware server. So it's not what I want. That's server info. Where's my server object? I know that is part of infrastructure. So I'm going to go down, there it is, under infrastructure. So here's my server object, and on the server object, we see all of the parameters listed in the database browser. I'm going to look for parameter. So hook parameters, install applications parameters, other types of parameters. We don't really see any parameters in here, and the reason is that parameters are what you see in the user interface, or they're a different type of parameter in different contexts in the system. But when we're talking parameters in CloudBolt, we're actually talking about custom fields. So a custom field is what we call it in the database when we're working with parameters. So You have custom fields and you have custom field values. The custom field is that parameter where we saw under the parameters admin. These are all custom fields here. Every custom field inside of CloudBolt can then also have multiple custom field values assigned to it. And a custom field value could be something as simple as a string that says Mike is a custom field value for name, just as an example. But so we're going to be doing some work with custom field values here. And I'm going to go over to my VS Code session. We're going to go ahead and say, maybe we're doing a run method. And in my run method, maybe we want to pass in, I haven't done a ton of development in VS Code, but stuff is not popping in the way that I would hope that it would. Let me see something real quick. Okay, so my issue was I did not have GitHub Copilot installed. So GitHub Copilot, if you haven't worked with it, is a really handy AI helper, I guess, for writing code. It attempts to make a stab at helping you develop things. So I went through, installed this extension in VS Code, and now I should get some more usable recommendations from Copilot. Okay, so again, back to my run method. So I'm building a run method. This run method is the insertion point in CloudBolt for any of the code, or not any, but a lot of the hook points in CloudBolt all use this run method. So it's pretty common for 95% of our use cases. I'm going to go ahead and start storing these things. So I'm going to say maybe, we're getting a server object. Probably should have just copied and pasted this. But just kind of logging through what we're doing here. Now, one of the things you'll notice, VS Code's highlighting this server. And the reason is because it says that server is not defined. And that's not a good thing. We want to make sure that we know about this server object. And we can't do that until we've imported it into this Python module. So I don't think there's a good way, as far as I'm aware, in VS Code to import this server. So there's a couple of ways that I find out how to do these imports. One of the ways that I found out the appropriate imports is here in Shell Plus, I can actually do a Control F. And I can look for server, because when we load Shell Plus, we're going to import all of these CloudBolt models. So you'll notice here, you'll see the imports happening here. Just see if I can find server. There's a lot of things that have server in the title, apparently. Let's see, maybe server, comma. There it is. So it's kind of hidden halfway down here. And it like I mentioned, it comes from infrastructure. So it's from infrastructure.model. So I'm just going to copy this whole string. So I'm going to do a Control C, go ahead and paste that inside of my CloudBolt instance. Now, one of the challenges with VS, at least as far as I'm aware, there's not an easy way for you to tell the system that this is a valid model inside of the CloudBolt system. So you may just have to ignore those your import errors, but we can validate just because we saw it in Shell Plus that this is how this happens. I'm going to delete everything else except for server because we don't really need to import all of those other things. But notice now my server is no longer highlighted underscored yellow. So that's up and ready to go. So we have our run method, our server object. The next thing that I'm going to want to do, like I mentioned, these are custom field values. So there's a couple of things that we can do for the server. We can do a C and then now sometimes in the database CF or custom fields will abbreviate CF. Other times it's custom field or something along those lines. I can do custom field values here on my server, and notice that when I do that, it shows that it's a Django-related descriptor, like some kind of mapping in the database. When we run into something that looks like this, what that usually means is we can use that same lingo that we used for parsing the database objects themselves. So I'm just going to do custom field values all. So here we can see these, again, these are objects. They're the custom field values that were set. Any of these they're metadata about the server that's in context here. So we can go through each of these custom field values. There's actually an easier way to work with these though. Why don't we just do, we could also do, instead of an all, we could also do a first, and that would get us the first value. And I'm just going to store that as a custom field value. Then we can say custom field value dot, you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of things available with this. Value is kind of the default abstract parameter for what the value of this actually is. You'll see for time zone, it's actually US Pacific. We could also see the field that this is mapped to by doing cfv.field, and then that's our custom field there. And if I do cfv.field.name, it's going to give us the actual name of that field as well. Or we could show the label, just kind of, and again, I could tab through if I'm suspicious that it might be like label. I can hit the tab after each of these periods, and it's going to let me browse through this database model as I get through it. So custom field values are what we're working with here. Now, to create a custom field value, let's see if this is something that's available already. So there isn't, it's not currently here, but there is a method for creating custom fields that's baked into the CloudBolt system, and we're going to go ahead and use that to create a custom field. And first I need to do that import. Actually, I thought about it for a second. I'm not going to do that import of the custom field helper method, just because I think it's useful to see how to actually create objects in the CloudBolt database. So we're going to do, I'm going to just start typing this out, and we'll see what we get for custom field values. Or custom field. So first we need to create a custom field. Now, custom field, again, we're back to this whole objects parameter here. And from objects, we can reference a lot of different actions. Now, I actually know that there's an action I'm looking for that's called get or create. Get or create is really handy because get or create allows us to go out to the database and say, get this custom field if it exists, but if it doesn't, I want you to create this custom field. And this is going to be, actually just going to close this, see if it gives us any additional, we didn't give it any parameters. So get or create will actually go through and browse the model to find information about that model. And I'm going to go back over to my database browser just to get more information, if I can remember which window it is, get more information around that. So again, custom field values, we're going to go back over here. I'm going to just search for it. Or custom field, sorry, not custom field values yet. There we go. There's my custom field. So when I look at a custom field, there are a number of different parameters that we can tie to that database object. I know that we need name. I know that we need label. I think even, you know what, there's also, instead of get or create, we can also do, I think there's just a create, which also, I believe this errors. Let's test this. Let's see if we can get this to create something that has a name that matches something that already exists, just to validate that this does in fact error. I think name is one of the things that we treat as unique in here. So let's say this domain password field, or this VLAN field, I think would be a good one to work with. But would be like wireless access point VLAN. We're going to copy that value, and then we're going to come over here and see if we can create another custom field value that matches that. So let's go ahead. Okay, it errors. There we go. Duplicate key violates constraints. Unique constraint. Infrastructure custom field name. So the name, that particular custom field already exists. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and create a new one. And this is going to be, let's just call it test underscore metadata. I know I don't have any custom fields called that already. It created a custom field now. Now the challenge is that I didn't store that, so I can't really do anything else with it. So let's do, now we're going to switch this over to get or create. And get or create will go through and it will give us part of the challenge here. Notice the return here is not a single custom field, but it's a tuple, which is an ordered listing in Python, where the first half of it is the actual custom field. The second half tells us, did it create? And this, in this case, it's false because we created it with the prior command. So I'm going to go into, let's do CF equals. So now we have our field stored. And we can go into our field. We can do nope, because I did it wrong. Custom field. I like to do this with these the get or create method. I usually do a comma and then an underscore. An underscore is just kind of a throwaway variable. And now I can go in and there's my custom field, and I can start to navigate through the custom field as needed. So there were a couple of things I needed when I looked at this example. I need a name. I want to give it a label as well, so something that's a little more user friendly here. I also want to set it to be required. So there's a couple of things that we're looking for here. And I'm just going to go through. Actually, you know what? We have it all here. We can search through here, or we can tab through it. So between the database browser and Shell Plus, it's really pretty functional. So we see label here. The other thing that I am also looking for, though, is required. So I'm going to just search for required in the database browser. There we go. It's just required, and it is a Boolean value. So let's go ahead and set those values here inside of Shell Plus for those resources. Okay, so custom field, we're going to do custom field dot label. We're going to call that test. That needs to be a string. Actually, I think I need to give it a type too. So that's the other thing that we want to pass in. This is, I would bet that the UI might even choke on displaying this. Let's see what it says. Okay, parameters, and that was test metadata. Without a type, it does not, it may not be very happy with me. Oh, this is it. No name. So it's showing up as no name, test underscore metadata. You can also see there's going to be no type associated with it, any of those things. And we do want those things defined for parameters. No type. So that's just kind of empty and boring. And I think since we created this in the database, we can't change it from the UI either, but we're going to change that here in just a second. So back over to Shell Plus. So we're going to say cf.label, and we're going to call this, we're going to stick with the same format, or the same kind of description, but make that a little more user-friendly. When you're working with objects in the CloudBolt Shell Plus system, if you've changed an object, you always have to save that object, or else it's not going to get written to the database. So now, if we go back over to our UI, we should be able to refresh and see that this parameter now shows test metadata. So showing us test metadata, there's our label, that's been updated. Next thing I'm going to do is going to be my type. So I'm going to do cf dot, and I'm going to tab that. So we see type here. And type, I know from experience, this needs to be str. Most of the types in CloudBolt are 3 characters, like a text field, which gives you a longer length to store in the database, would be txt. You can also do password, which would be pwd, or encrypted text, which would be etxt. A couple of different types inside of the database. You could always create a new custom field in the UI and then select the type you want to see, and then come back into the database and see what that type looks like as far as the database name for the type. So but we're going to change the type to string here. We're going to do cf.save. And we can come back over. I just like to validate this as we step through things. Just taking a second. Hopefully we're seeing our type now. Great, that could show up. Hey, look at that. We now have a string type. We're seeing some different constraints that are available. Again, these were shown before, but all of these different things are now showing. So we're seeing, as we're interacting with this in-shell plus, the real-time feedback for this. So let's go through. So we have this. Let's go back over to our VS Code session. Now that we have the type, we have the test metadata. I'm also going to do cf.required equals true. And I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to make a couple of changes here, and then I'll save them all at once. You can make multiple changes and then run that save action at the end. But I want to change the type. I also want to, I'm not going to allow multiple values or any of this other stuff, but maybe description is something else that we want to put in there. So just, again, CF, and I'm just going to tab through this and see, oh, look, there is description equals, this is my description. And we're editing this right in the database. And the whole point that I'm doing this is I'm showing you how I'm validating this, and then I'm going to shift it all up here into my function to make that one call, and then we're going to test it again with a different custom field that we're going to create. But let's go ahead. We're going to do cf.save. So now we have our new parameter. Let's refresh. And now we see we have that required slider is selected. And here's my generic description. So we've just created a custom field. We've created a new object inside of the CloudBolt database. We've updated that object. We've done a little bit of work with it. Let's go back over to Shell Plus. And I want to put this together into a usable function here. So I have my run method, and I'm going to take my run method, and I'm going to, in development, I like to write different sub-methods for different repeatable tasks that I'm trying to do. So create custom field. And this gives me the flexibility to, number one, it allows me to almost define documentation for my automation inside of the function names itself. But the more modular this is, I can use this create custom field across multiple different things I might be doing here. Maybe I'm creating multiple custom fields as part of the use case. But yeah, so maybe we say we want to take in field name, description. Actually, instead of field name, let's just do name. And there's actually an out-of-the-box method that does this, but we're going to build it real quick just to show you what this looks like. Name, label, description. What else did we do down here? Type. So I think those are some of the big ones that we're going to need. Let's go ahead, and then we're going to go ahead. Oh, so that's interesting. So GitHub Copilot's starting to track these things. I don't know that it's from infrastructure.models is the only challenge for custom fields. So GitHub Copilot's a great tool, but it does, I think they call them hallucinations. It's just a language model that's trying to interpret that. I don't think. So again, I'm going to just search down here and go up to the top, custom field. So it is coming from infrastructure.models. So okay, it's a little more intelligent than I was thinking. And it doesn't want to give me the suggestion because I made fun of it. So there we go. I'm just going to take its suggestion to start. I'm going to shift this import up top. And actually, since it's the same Python module, I can just do this and put it all in one line, keep that a little cleaner. Now I'm importing multiple things from that module. We have this create custom field method now. This create custom field method, we are, and again, I just took what they're doing. We're going to do custom field.objects.getterCreate. I'm actually going to pull some of this out of here because there are times in CloudBolt you might work with different integrations that all may leverage a similar custom field, and we want to be able to not overwrite those existing integrations. So I don't want to ensure that we're looking for all four of these, because if we pass all four of those in as key value pairs into this getter create, it's going to either get something that matches all of these things, or if my description is different on something that already exists, but the name matches, what's going to happen is this is going to attempt to create another custom field that has the same name, and it's just going to fail. So I know that name is unique for this custom field and for a lot of objects in the CloudBolt system. So I'm going to only keep the name, and then I'm going to do defaults. So this is just something that can get passed into Django. I can say defaults equals defaults. I haven't specified defaults yet. But I'm going to do that here. So defaults equals, and then I'm just going to set this up as creating a new dictionary. And this is not right. Actually, you know what? The way that it was showing it to do this is this will work. The label, description type, this format. So I'm going to create a new dictionary that's called defaults. That's taking in my label, description, and type. That those defaults won't, like if we leverage another field, it's not going to overwrite it. But yeah, so, and again, this getter create, the other thing we want to do, I'm going to capture the custom field, and I'm going to throw away the created. And I'm going to store that as custom field, and I'm going to store the created as underscore. Now, really, the last thing I need to do is to return my custom field. And maybe I call this, instead of create, maybe it's get or create. You know, maybe that's a little more descriptive. I also like to put really good descriptions in the method itself that tell you what we're trying to do. Copilot just had a suggestion. There we go. There we go. Perfect. So it's already interpreting what we're attempting to do and taking a stab at that. All right. So we have our method here. And a lot of times I will test this entire flow. So this entire method here with shell plus, the other thing we can do, we can test each line of code to build a method, but then we can also test the method itself. So I can just copy this entire thing here. I can paste it into my terminal window. I can hit enter. And now I have a new function that's stored inside of my environment. Until I close out of shell plus, this remains as a function here. So I can do get or create. I'm going to tab this because it knows about it now. Then I can pass in a name. My name's going to be, let's do test data 2. My label's going to be, how's this? Actually, you know what? One of the things that I'm already noticing, notice the highlighting here in shell plus, type. I don't like to ever use this word. This is a keyword inside of Python. So I'm going to do cf underscore type and change that real quick before I forget. There we go. That's a little better. It should still work below. Actually, let's do this. I want to save this because I want to keep what I'm using. It's gonna fail because those are required parameters. But I can take and reset my function now, and that's going to keep the new data, or take the new data. And I can hit the up arrow in shell plus to get back to my last executed command and continue to cycle through them as much as needed. So my name, my label, third thing is description. I'll just call it descriptive, and then type we're going to pass in, this is going to be a type of string. Let's go ahead and let's store this as well. So we should be able to just get the custom field back. Let's see. Look at that. It created a new custom field from our method. So the process of going through leveraging shell plus to navigate the CloudBolt models, using those models, let's just verify that this did actually happen. I'm not making things up. Let's go over metadata. How's this? So here's our new parameter. Notice that I did not pass required in, so maybe that's one more thing that we want to do. Completely forgot about required, but that's as easy as going back and doing required. And maybe we want to, and this is just a Python thing if you don't know this, but I can set a default for this, and I'm going to say false. Maybe required is not my default value. I can actually, when I'm using this function, I can use the same call, and I don't have to pass in a value for required because we already know the default is false. Unless I want to make it true, and then I can either pass this in as a functional or a positional parameter after str. I can pass in true or false. Or I can also, like, I can state that I'm doing, here, why don't we do this? Let's update and show it to me. So I've restored my function taking in that required parameter. This actually, again, this will not update though. If I rerun this against my test metadata 2 custom field, it's not going to set it to required. Reason being is because that is a default here. Actually, I didn't even call it, so that's just bad form. Nope, I don't need that. That's what I want. Required. There we go. Thanks, GitHub Copilot. So I'm going to save that, and then we're going to copy this. Okay, now we've stored it. It's actually going to include required as part of our inputs here. And so like I said, I should be able to just use that last call, and it's still going to give me test metadata 2. So we have house this. Now, or I could do test metadata 3, and I could call this house this now. And if I don't pass anything in here, it's going to continue to be false for required. But I can either do true and pass it as a positional parameter, or after I've answered all of my required inputs, and requireds are always going to go before the ones that have default set. Or I can specify and pass this as a keyword argument. So let's give that a shot. There's my new custom field that we created. So just leveraging Shell Plus to create these things. We can, so the other handy thing, let's say I have my custom field. If I want to, I could just delete it. And now my custom field is gone. Should be gone. Let's check it. Let's look for house this now. Yeah, house this now is now gone. So test metadata 2 is there, but 3 is not. If we go back and recreate 3 again, though. So be careful with delete operations in the database. I wouldn't do that super often. I know that nothing's linked to this because I just created it, but let's go ahead. Let's run our method again. We have now our custom field. We now have house this now. We refresh the screen. We can see house this now is now showing up. It's test metadata 3, and it is a required field. So we've added some additional functionality to that method inside of Shell Plus. We're using Shell Plus to build out that method. Okay, the last thing that I think we're going to step through real quick is, now that we've created that parameter, how do we tie a parameter value to a server in CloudBolt? And I don't have my server in context anymore. I actually exited, but I'm going to gather that server again. And then I'm going to do server dot, and I'm going to take a look at get. That's not what I want. So get, and then I tabbed on C. I can see get CF values as dictionary. And I don't think I showed this before, but this is handy. Gives you a printout of all of the values that are set as custom field values on the server today, which is really, really nice to see. This is not all of the data about the server. These are just things that are declared as custom field values. So I'm also going to do, instead of get custom field values, I'm going to say set and do a tab. Set value for custom field. I'm going to just tell it to go. And with nothing passed in, it's going to give me an error telling me it needs a custom field name and a value. So let's go ahead and we're going to set, this should be fairly easy, fairly straightforward. But let's set this custom field name as test underscore metadata 3. And then the value for this is going to be my new metadata. Let's go ahead and hit enter. That server. Now, if we go back to that custom field values as dictionary, we should see that this is, where did it go? My new metadata. There it is. Test metadata 3. This value has now been added to the server. Now, one of the things I will point out is that we may not see that in the UI for this server already. Under the parameters tab, let's just talk about custom fields a little bit in a little more depth. Let's try and get that value to show up under our parameters tab or our details tab. I think we still have that custom field value saved. So to do that in the UI, how we would do that is we would go through and we would set this to show on objects, and show on objects would show it under the parameters tab. So let's start with show on objects. We still have that custom field saved, I believe, right? So there we go. Custom field dot show. It's showing objects in the UI, but under the covers, it's actually showing servers. We're going to do true. Actually, let's see what the existing value is. Should be false. There we go. We're going to set this to true. We're going to save. Then we're going to come back over to our UI and verify after a refresh that the parameter for test metadata 3, or make sure I didn't select the wrong one. Refresh this one more time. That's very interesting. Let's take a second, troubleshoot this. Let's take a look at the parameter itself and see. Okay, so show on objects now shows up. So that's what we wanted to see. That happened in the database. So that's there now. Let me make sure this is the right server. MESE demo 011. Let's go ahead and do server hostname. Oh, 001 versus 011, I think. Okay, 011, that's the problem. I used the wrong server. There we go, 001. That'll make a difference. So we have now, how's this now? We can see our value here, and that's just by programmatically hitting the toggles on this custom field. The next thing I'm going to do is we can also show data under the server tab, the details tab itself, by making this what we call an attribute inside of CloudBolt. And attributes would show either under the configuration section on the server, or if you're looking at a CloudBolt resource, it'll also show under the primary page for that resource as well. So the next thing we'll do is we're going to do cf.show and tab that out again. Show as attribute. Existing value is false. We're going to set it to true. And then we're going to save that value. So now, again, in theory, hopefully we're on the right server still, we should see an additional piece of information. There we go. How's this now? My new metadata. So just a real quick example of leveraging Shell Plus to do real things inside of the CloudBolt system. Again, the main reason I would use Shell Plus for these kinds of things is to build out automation and test and validate as we go through that process. So Shell Plus is an extremely powerful capability. There's a lot that can be done with it, from filtering your database objects to setting information on the database objects. So hopefully this was an informative session, but this is, I would say that this is actually, I'll show one more thing for Shell Plus now that I'm thinking through it. The other hint, the other tip or trick that I usually make with Shell Plus, I almost never use this out CloudBolt Manage PY. I actually use cv-sp. And what that is it's an alias that I've set inside of my CloudBolt system for my root user that says that we want to run this command whenever we type in cv-sp. So the last thing I'll leave you with, I also do, I will usually take a look at my root bash rc file. But the first thing I do whenever I log onto a new CloudBolt system is I'll edit my bash rc file, and I will add this line into the bash rc file. Once you've done that, the next time you SSH to the appliance, or if you reload your session, it will automatically alias CB-SP. So it saves me a little bit of time, just keeps me from having to memorize the command. But this is what you would want to do to make that Shell Plus access a little bit easier. So I believe that's all for today on Shell Plus. Another development tool that's really handy at CloudBolt is our developers documentation. And that can be accessed by going to docs.cloudbolt.io, selecting the Cloud Management Platform hyperlink, and then on the left-hand side here, we see this developer guide. So the developer guide, we didn't want to recreate the wheel and rewrite a whole bunch of documents that we already had in here, but if you navigate through this developer's guide, kind of walks you through a lot of these processes and things that you may want to work on, things like developing blueprints and working through different types of blueprint development constructs, or really XaaS blueprints is a big thing that our customers do, is really anything as a service. That might be an API call to some system that the CloudBolt doesn't support out of the box, walking you through the process, how to leverage those different components. So the developer's guide, I would highly recommend. It's a great resource covering through a lot of the things that CloudBolt does. So let's just kind of step through some of these. So extensibility overview, a lot of the things that we can customize inside of CloudBolt. There are some good hyperlinks, again, to different sections of the documentation, but talking about the different areas of extensibility, what these are, what they do, where to find different CloudBolt content. So the content library inside of CloudBolt is a pre-curated set of content for CloudBolt that is put together and maintained by the CloudBolt team. So you can go in your CloudBolt instance, you can just hit that content library tab in your CloudBolt instance and import any new blueprints or ZUIs or XaaS type functionality that you need to from the content library. So a lot of really good content out there. Even if you're not going to leverage the content that exists out there, why don't we actually show this? This would be a good idea while we're going through this. But I like to use the content library and the CloudBolt Forge as examples for how to do something in CloudBolt. So if we go over to our library tab in our CloudBolt instance, we can see the different types of things that are available inside of the CloudBolt content library. A lot of these are cloud-based objects or integrations with different systems. But like I mentioned, the content type is really what I would focus on if you're trying to build new use cases. Blueprints, there's a lot of really good blueprints. Some of these include build actions, teardown actions, day two management capability, as well as discovery plugins. So downloading one of these is a really good way to start there. Orchestration actions are going to be more along the lines of things that we need to do at predetermined intervals during a process in CloudBolt. So orchestration actions are also really powerful. There's a couple of really good options or examples for building orchestration actions here. Recurring jobs in CloudBolt is leveraging the CloudBolt job scheduler to do something on a recurring basis inside of your environment. Resource actions would be actions that can be taken against a CloudBolt resource. Some of these are like, reload the Apache config or restart Apache against an Apache web server, things along those lines. Some of these are pretty basic. Some of these are a little more complex in nature. We don't have any rules in the content library yet. Server actions would be actions we can take against a server. One of the ones I actually used this earlier today with a customer is clone VM. This is something that would work inside of vCenter where we can go out and actually point at an existing virtual machine. We can clone that virtual machine, and now we have an exact replica of the parent virtual machine. Again, really easy to import content from the content library. Just hit the download button here. And then finally, UI extensions. And UI extensions in CloudBolt are things that allow us to extend the user interface. Some of these will include tabs, new tabs that show up on servers that pull in data from an external system. Some of these include dashboards, so custom dashboards would show up under our dashboards tab inside of CloudBolt. One example of that is, we'll give that a second to load, is this group quotas dashboard here. I actually have another video in the How Do I series where we cover the group quotas dashboard, actually creating this dashboard, walking you through every step of that process. Some of these UI interfaces are used for like sharing code across different components so that you're not reusing code from one blueprint to another. And a lot of these also include what we call an admin page, which would allow you to do something for that integration. And one of those examples, I've been working on this Git management GUI that would give us an admin interface for interacting with different blueprints inside of CloudBolt and then committing those blueprints based off of some configurations that we've stored here to source control to include all of the JSON data that needs to be exported with part of these blueprints. So it's not just the underlying code, but everything that defines this content as code, exporting it directly to your Git repositories that you have. So just another example of a user interface type or a ZUI type of content. And again, these are all content library items. They're pre-curated content. The CloudBolt team puts these together and maintains them. So a lot of really good examples. And that's just to get started. Maybe you're building another dashboard. Go ahead and go out to the content library, find some other dashboards. And it doesn't actually tag anything as a dashboard here. But if I go, actually UI extensions would include a dashboard. But I believe, well, I know some of these are dashboards. Multi-cards and Hello World dashboard extension. Either of those we could download and get some examples of how we're doing those as a dashboard and writing a dashboard for CloudBolt. So, all right. The next piece of information here in the developer's guide, the CloudBolt Forge is another good use case or another good repository of information that has to do with content for CloudBolt. The CloudBolt Forge is kind of the next level down after the content library. A lot of this has been put together by the CloudBolt team. This CloudBolt Forge, we're also working towards getting this to support some user forums. I want to say it's under discussions. Here we go. So if you haven't seen this yet, this is new, I believe, within the past couple of weeks. We are opening up a user forum, so you can go to the discussions tab of the CloudBolt Forge and start to get engaged with the community. The CloudBolt Forge should allow both CloudBolt admins as well as our customers to be able to commit content here so that you can share with the community and learn from others. There's a lot of different examples in here. These typically do not include, let me just verify to prove that I'm correct. They typically don't include all of the JSON payload that we need to define the entire blueprint. In a lot of cases, it's just the Python actions needed to build the blueprint. So these are a little more manual in nature. These are more examples that you can go through and see exactly, maybe how would we create an AWS DynamoDB, or how would we even talk to the AWS Boda 3 API? And you can start to gather some of that information from looking at the CloudBolt Forge, trying to find similar integrations or similar things that other people have done. Like we can go through and search this Forge to find, we want to find out how to work with databases. And now we have a whole bunch of different code that references database. And we can go through and pick through and see if we find anything that matches what we're trying to do. So CloudBolt Forge is another great source for learning things in CloudBolt. And then again, back to the developer guide, we're talking through a lot of different elements inside of the system. The other thing that I'll call out here before we wrap this up is CloudBolt internals. Getting started with Shell Plus. This kind of walks you through some of that interaction with Shell Plus. Exploring models with Shell Plus. So just some code examples, maybe more, if you're more of a text-based learner, you can go here and get some more information about Shell Plus. Generate database diagram is also another handy feature. I've seen some people use this. I haven't done this myself yet, but you can go through and actually export some database mappings showing what's going on in the CloudBolt database, what talks to what's related to what other kind of objects. So this could be something really handy as you go through your development journey in CloudBolt. And then finally, the object model. And this is really just talking through the Django and the object relational mapper. Some of this is just links right to the Django models, and then other links to other things that we have in here, but just some of the prerequisites behind it. But the developer guide's a really good source. I think it's a lot of good reference material to help you get started your development journey with CloudBolt. This concludes another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt series. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Thanks for sticking around for the entire thing. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to your account team. We'd be happy to dive into any of these topics a little bit further. If you have ideas for additional videos that you'd like to see in this series, please let us know. We're always looking for new ideas and things to cover to help you in your automation journey. So thanks again, and happy automating with CloudBolt.